For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
I would say that the Christian wants to know two answers to be able to give the critic, because there's two areas that come up. One, if the critic knows anything about Scripture, they scoff at people living to 900 years old. Is there any evidence that people live to be these great ages?
Gosh, that is a great question, and one that, quick backstory. The Lord really blessed me, I feel personally, when I chose to humble myself under His Word about 7 years ago and believe as a child, say, Lord, I'm willing to trust your Word as written. And it was only after I had that shift in my spirit that the Lord gave me really an avalanche of evidence through Noah's flood and dinosaurs that convinced me it was overwhelmingly true. And I went through, it was like being born again, the 18-inch gap between my head and my heart got aligned like at a chiropractor, and it really made my faith much stronger than it is today. But that was like the core shift of my belief. But the frosting that I got on top of that was about 6 months ago when I ran into the long ages that Dr. John Sanford talks about how did these patriarchs live 912 years? Because that was a stumbling block for me as a teenager I was asking my mom, the Bible's got to be some kind of a myth book because these guys are living 900 years old. And then Dr. John Sanford, a geneticist who invented the gene gun from Cornell University, absolutely nails it in his book called Genetic Entropy. I unpacked his science, his statistics, ran with that stuff myself, reanalyzed it all, and we absolutely know with certainty what happened with those long lifespans. It was a biological decay curve. If you follow the Masoretic text exactly, you've got 1,656 years, give and take, between creation and the flood. So you've got Adam and Eve with the perfect print of human genome, and then the sin and fall and corruption starts taking over, and then they start gradually declining in lifespan, getting shorter and shorter and shorter because Adam lived, I think, 930 and Methuselah 969. The average of the lifespan of these pre-flood patriarchs, 912 years. Then you hit the flood about 1,700 years after creation, and the lifespans don't fall off of a shelf. They systematically and exponentially began declining over the next 1,000 years, following down what's called a power law curve. And you can throw polynomial or curvilinear regression at this, run the math, and it fits with what's called an R-square of 95%, which is uncanny as a statistician. The likelihood of the model being built by chance is 1 chance in a quadrillion. So something's going on with these lifespans that perfectly fits an exponential power law decline where they get off the boat after the flood, they 600 years long, they live 500 years, 400 years, 300 years, 200 years, and it starts going down all the way through the book of Genesis to the point where we have the lifespans today. And you can plot it out, and there's only one of these 23 data points that is slightly outside of what the model would predict. So it's absolutely a biological decay curve. And what happened is if you take all of the human genome and bottleneck it down to just 8 people after the flood, inbreeding and mutations began exponentially increasing, resulting in shorter and shorter lifespans after the flood. That didn't happen suddenly, but happened gradually. So talk about icing on the cake. It's amazing evidence that completely substantiates the Bible. One more thing to say about that. I had to come face to face as a behavioral scientist who's testified in all these court cases before. I had to ask myself this question: why in the world would some ancient sheep herder with a quill pen writing on animal skins want to make this stuff up about these long ages? Why would he be motivated to try to convince people 3,500 years ago that people were living hundreds and hundreds of years long? And the second question is, how could he have done that? Was this guy trained in exponential power curves? How did he perfectly fit these data along a systematically declining slope? He didn't know polynomial math. He didn't know the exponential decay curve. He didn't know power law regression. But somehow he's just recording these true historical lifespans, and you can't make this stuff up. It absolutely confirms the Bible is real history.
Wow, that was an incredible answer to a very common question, Dr. Biddle, a question I had on my mind as well when I first came to Christianity. And it truly is amazing that we are looking at, as you pointed out, a biological decay curve that's perfectly consistent with deleterious mutation accumulation that we have today. I typically like to point out we can take this point of most accumulating mutational load back to a point of least accumulating mutational load, and that would be a point of perfection, a point of Adam and Eve with no mutations. And I like how you pointed this out, Dan. To accuse the biblical authors of fabricating this story and making up these ages would be to accuse them of doing so with the advanced knowledge of mathematics and biology to invent this perfect biological decay curve. So
wow.
Great answer.
Yeah, we just did a video on this topic. It's on our YouTube channel. I think it's about 6 minutes long. But for those interested in that and all the math behind it, check out that video. I think it's called Long Ages of the Flood, something like that. It's great.
I'll watch
Great
that
points.
video. Highly recommend. Matt,
right.
did you have a couple comments?
Oh, absolutely. Longevity is a great topic of mine. One thing that I think you will find interesting is one of the leading geneticists on anti-aging is a guy by the name of Dr. Aubrey de Grey. Now, he's a secularist. He probably believes in evolution. I mean, I doubt he's a creationist. I would probably know. And he's actually said that we're trying to go back and with gene editing sequences have children being born with a better genome than we have, be it by taking their mutations away. And then when they ask him, what's the potential of the human beings being alive? He said, oh, there's somebody alive today that has the potential to live for about 1,000 years. And
wow.
What are the odds that he picked the exact age and date of the scriptural people being born with perfect genome, be it matching 1,000 years?
That's fantastic.
Many Bible readers feel puzzled when reading the genealogies in Genesis. They describe patriarchs living for hundreds and hundreds of years. Adam lived to be 930, his son Seth 912, Methuselah 969, Noah 950. What's going on here? Did ancient Bible writers just imagine these incredibly long lifespans? This would seem to be the case, since people today only live into their 70s or 80s, often with the help of modern medicine. These long lifespans must be mythical, right? Well, maybe not. Certain compelling reasons to believe that the biblical authors were recording the actual long lifespans of these patriarchs have persuaded trained geneticists to take these Genesis numbers at face value. The remarkable picture from these lifespans only emerges when plotting them on a graph. After all, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Only then do we see that the average lifespan of these patriarchs who lived before the flood lived an average of 912 years. After the flood, their lifespans began systematically declining, following what's known by biologists as a biological decay curve. A mythical list of ages would be unlikely to take such a predictable, exponentially declining curve. We see that Noah, who was the 10th from Adam, lived through the flood and died at age 950. Noah's son Shem lived 600 years. His grandson 438 years. 5 generations past Noah, lifespans declined to the 200s. Abraham, who was 10 generations after Noah, lived to be 175. We also have Jacob, when he was 130 years old, stating to Pharaoh that he had not lived as long as his ancestors. Jacob later died at 147. 7 generations later, living to be only 120. What's going on with these lifespans? They systematically decline along a familiar-looking pattern that statisticians call an exponential power curve. Plotting their ages does not reveal a straight-line slope, but a curved one. They don't suddenly bottom out right after the flood, nor do they decline eventually. Rather, the lifespans decline along a non-linear, exponential curve over time, and this curve literally passes every test for statistical significance. Whatever is going on here is not some chance occurrence. Their pattern breaks every possibility of being some fluke. Geneticist Dr. John Sanford of Cornell University, who was part of a team that invented the gene gun, noted that these lifespans fit so tightly along this power curve that 95% of the lifespan variance is explained by the number of generations from Noah. This statistical model matches the biblical data so closely that its likelihood of occurring by chance lies below 1 in 1,000. Now that's uncanny. This exceptionally strong correlation allows us to predict how long people would live based on how many generations they are from Noah. For example, the curve predicts that someone living 10 generations after Noah would have a 90% likelihood of living between 137 and 234 years. Similarly, it predicts with 90% certainty that a descendant alive 15 generations after Noah would live between 100 and 172 years. This model is so powerful that the average lifespans predicted by the model are within 10% of the actual lifespans recorded in the Bible. This close match reaches well beyond coincidence. This leads to an even more stunning realization. The lifespans in the biblical text span over 2,500 years of recorded history, and the original portions of Scripture that include these lifespans, Genesis 5 and 11, were produced by eyewitnesses whose lives overlapped one another for centuries and decades. So how in the world could they be faked? All of the original authors over numerous generations would have to be in on the scam, conspiring together to record lifespans that perfectly declined along an exponential power curve. Like that's going to happen. Think about that for a minute. Why would they even want to do that? If you were going to make up some story about people in the past that you wanted your future readers to believe, why would you include such unbelievable lifespans? Making this myth explanation even less likely, whoever would fabricate this story must have understood advanced statistics. In addition, look at how the lifespans before the flood are stable. They don't follow any sloping trend line. The systematic decline only starts after the flood, suggesting that some aspect of the flood event initiated the downsloping power curve in lifespans. What was it? Dr. John Sanford explains, the mathematical nature of the declining lifespans arose because the biblical accounts are true and are actually faithfully recording the historical unfolding of some fundamental natural degenerative process. The shape of the downward slope should be immediately recognized by any biologist. It is a biological decay curve. Noah's descendants were undergoing some type of rapid degenerative process. There is now very strong evidence that humans are degenerating genetically and have been for thousands of years due to continuously accumulating mutations. This makes it very reasonable to conclude that the systematic degeneration of man that is documented in the Bible was due to mutation accumulation and resultant genetic entropy. A genetic bottleneck may well explain why mutations suddenly kicked into high gear. This occurs when a very small group of individuals become isolated from a once larger population. The few individuals carry fewer genetic variations than their forebears. They now must build each generation using less information in their cellular blueprints. Biologists have watched lifespans decline after bottlenecks in various animal populations, from dogs to guppies. The Genesis lifespan decay curve looks like real biology, which points to real history. Books throughout the entire Bible, written by different authors in different time frames, affirm this history. For example, Peter referred to the days of Noah, when 8 souls were saved through water. Shrinking the entire human population down to 8 was the ultimate genetic bottleneck in human history. This Genesis-based trend line also points to a recent creation. Luke 3 lists a specific number of generations from Adam to Jesus, and the first names on that list coincide with the names in the Genesis accounts. The smooth, systematic decline in longevity leaves no room for hundreds or thousands of missing generations. Even after watching this, many may still hold the popular but poorly defended position that ancient shepherds wrote their dreamed-up family history on animal skins, but it defies reason that ancient writers developed a text that spanned multiple generations, included over 20 lifespans that track over 2,500 years, and include 2 distinct and biologically relevant trend lines from the pre- and post-flood eras. It would be impossible to collude such a statistical phenomenon over generations. So, what are the implications that come from this? Well, for one, this shows that the whole of Scripture fits together, with several books from the Old and New Testaments referring to these genealogies as authentic history. Even Jesus himself referenced by name Abel and Noah as though they were real people. Paul also referred to them historically, and even computed time spans based on these genealogies, treating them as real history. What causes aging anyway? Biologists continue to investigate unknown aspects of aging, but largely agree that accumulated mutations within the body during one's lifetime accompany the symptoms of aging, including wrinkled skin, weak bones, and loss of immune and other system efficiency. If God made Adam genetically perfect in the beginning, then no wonder his close sons and daughters could live so long. The Bible also promises that Christ would be our kinsman redeemer, and breaking apart these genealogies would undermine the gospel itself. Christ the Redeemer had to map back to Adam as the Bible promised. These findings strongly support the historicity and veracity of the Bible, especially the book of Genesis. They suggest that although the longevity of the early patriarchs seem extreme from our perspective, it could have been normal for them. The declining lifespans of the post-flood patriarchs was due to the ongoing degeneration that resulted from Adam and Eve's fall and were accelerated by the genetic bottleneck caused by the flood. The drastic decline in lifespans immediately following the flood also supports the worldwide extent of the flood, refuting ideas that it was ordinary or local. Because the genealogies and lifespans are linked, they validate the tight father-to-son nature of the genealogies, without gaps, leading to Adam and Eve living just thousands of years ago. Looking for answers about what the Bible teaches about creation, the fossil record, dinosaurs? Download the Genesis Apologetics app from the iTunes or Google Play stores for answers to these questions and more.